One. Welcome to the Weather Insights Tropical Briefing. I'm meteorologist Scott Pitney along with meteorologist Jeff Lindner. And this is November 8th, Friday morning, a little after 9 Central Time. We have the disturbance number one, dropped a little bit. It was up to 30% chance of development, 20% chance of development now, heading west-northwest. We'll just keep an eye on that one. Of course, the big topic of conversation in the tropics here on November 8th is Hurricane Raphael. And Jeff, it's amazing really to me that we're talking about a Cat 3 hurricane in November 8th in the Gulf. And normally if this were August or September, it'd be all hands on deck, but this thing is just not going anywhere according to the models. Path intensity, it is expected to decrease in intensity. It's going to be encountering a lot of wind shear, dry air, pretty decent convection, relatively small storm. What are your thoughts on Raphael as we see this rare Category 3 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico?
Yeah, this is welcome to November, the new September in the Atlantic Basin.
Right.
It's been a very much backloaded season. We had a very quiet August and even early part of September, and then ever since mid-September, the storms have been coming right and left. And yeah, you could see a westward moving major hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico on November the 8th. I think the last time this happened was Hurricane Gene back in 1980, around November 12th and 15th, and very similar path moved due west. There's really no other precedent for this, and going back to 1851, there's just not a whole lot of precedent for a westward moving hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico in November. Most of the hurricanes would either move eastward, like Milton did, or kind of hang out down here in the Bay of Campeche. And you can see the satellite presentation here starting to degrade. This was much
Mhm.
better organized last night. We had a nice eye feature in this, and definitely there's some dry air wrapping in here on the south side, now getting into the inner core. And you can also see on the west side that, it looks like it's hitting a wall. That is the shear that is starting to impinge on this. And so the weakening trend that we were anticipating to start kind of after it crossed Cuba, and then it kind of strengthened a little bit. And now I think that ultimate weakening trend is really getting going here. And welcome to November hurricane tracks in the Gulf of Mexico too. This is,
Yeah.
like you said, if this was August, September, the bells and whistles would be all up along the Gulf Coast, and this would probably be a really significant hurricane impact for somebody. But it's
Mhm.
November, and yeah, fronts coming down, you have high pressure, you have a lot of different factors with steering, and it's also the depth of the system. As it weakens, it begins to be steered by different influences compared to like what it is now when it's a category 3 hurricane. And so sort of a westward motion here into the weekend, weakening into a tropical storm, then doing this cyclonic loop here in the central Gulf of Mexico, and we'll see there. This is kind of, we'll go to the guidance real quick, and you can see there's kind of two options here as we get into the weekend. One option is it does this loop and meanders back down south and probably dissipates into a remnant low,
Yeah.
or it sort of does kind of a half of a loop and then meanders up towards southern Louisiana, the central Gulf Coast. Again, this wouldn't be anything impactful. We're talking about a tropical depression probably at this point.
Just right. Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
just rain, maybe there's definitely going to be elevated seas all along the Gulf Coast just because you have a big hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico right now generating big waves.
Yeah.
And so rip currents are going to be really high this weekend. Seas are going to be high, tides are going to be up. But this isn't going to be a big hurricane impact on the U.S. Gulf Coast. No matter which solution here finally comes to be. And I don't really know if this track is going to hold. I could see this coming up like this and maybe kind of lifting on off to the north and the east with time and not kind of doing this loop. Or it may never get to that point. It could, by Sunday or Monday, this thing could just be a remnant low and we never really have to deal with it. And this is one of the big factors here looking at the water vapor imagery. You can see decent outflow here, but you're starting to undercut on the west side. You can kind of see some of these cloud elements here undercutting,
Mhm.
and that is that shear starting to impinge. You can see a lot of shear here off the Texas
Yeah.
coast, ripping almost subtropical jet here over the Texas coast. And then this dark area down here is this big mass of dry air.
Yep.
And you can almost just see here, even on the water vapor, that is starting to wrap in now to the inner core. And if
Mhm.
you just look at this, the hurricane is starting to what we call pulse. And so you're getting pulsing, big burst of convection near the center versus kind of a steady state. And that indicates that dry air is getting into that inner core, getting into that eye wall structure and starting to erode it. And so the storms aren't as consistent. They kind of burst up and then collapse. And so this is now on its way, and it'll be interesting to see here. But I have a feeling this may weaken a lot faster than what we're kind of expecting. If you kind of just look at the structure and the negative factors around it, I think the intensity forecast here may be a little aggressive, and this could weaken relatively quickly. You can see the hurricane center here weakening it. There's some guidance here that keeps it a little bit stronger, but pretty much everything drops it down to a tropical storm and
Mhm.
then just on into a remnant low as we get into late this weekend and early next week. And so, I don't know when the last time we've had a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, not hit land somewhere. I mean,
Very
generally
strange.
speaking, when we talk about hurricanes in the Gulf,
Yeah.
we're like it's landlocked, it's going to make landfall somewhere. But this is one of those really rare instances where we've gotten a hurricane in the Gulf and it looks like it's just going to dissipate in the Gulf of
Yeah.
Mexico, and that
A
kind of gives you an
strong.
idea of just how
Yeah.
unfavorable it gets in November.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting. Um, and
So one of the other
this.
things that the
Mhm.
to look at is the tides. We're not anticipating significant tidal flooding on the upper Texas coast. So this is Galveston Bay entrance over towards the Bolivar Lighthouse. And so, we're up in that 3.5 foot, maybe 4 foot range above mean level of water. That's the barnacle level. Typically 4 to 4.5 feet mean low water is our threshold where we start getting issues on the coast. Would it surprise me at high tide if we got some overwash over on Bolivar near Highway 87 or the west end of Galveston Island, Blue Water Highway in Missouri County? It wouldn't. So be aware of that this weekend. There is going to be high water down on the coast, but this is not going to be your Barrel or Alberto that we saw back in June and July. The water level is going to be lower than that. But just because of the big waves, so we're talking 6 to 10 foot swells coming up to the coast as we get into this weekend. That's a lot of water that gets put on the coast with that type of wave action. And so there will be water level rise. There's not going to be a lot of beach down there. Be careful at high tide. And if you're heading offshore or fishing this weekend or anything like that, it's going to be pretty rough out there in the Gulf.
Yeah, yeah. And as you said before, we got a front coming through too. So that's coming through Texas, southeast Texas, late Friday into Saturday. Pretty decent shot of rain through that time period. Wind shift to the north. Again, not a cold front to me, a cool front, but short-lived. Temperature still hovering around the 80s. But the main thing is it's going to be blocking this storm, which is a good thing. So rare indeed, but good news that for right now and in the foreseeable future, it doesn't look like this thing is going to be making landfall in the United States. Of course, for the latest updates on the tropics, keep it right here on the Weather Insights YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed and turn those notifications on. Also check out our blog on the Weather Insights blog. Program note, we have a special guest coming on next week. I don't want to give it up just yet, but be looking for that for next week's Weather Insight podcast. Jeff, thank you very much.